What's the worst gift you ever received? On my 19th birthday, my godmother gave me a golden locket and announced I had 9 months to get pregnant or lose my entire college fund and inheritance. My godmother had been my guardian since my parents died. She managed their life insurance and my college fund, using the money as leverage to control me. She believed her infertility was God's punishment and saw me as her chance to raise a baby. She'd been planning this since I hit puberty, dropping hints about young motherhood being a blessing. I thought she was just old-fashioned until that birthday dinner when she made it real in front of all her church friends. The locket contained a tracking chip that monitored my location and sent alerts if I went to any medical clinics. She'd arranged for 3 nice boys from her church to court me, scheduling dates and Bible study sessions where they discussed starting families young. The boys knew about the deadline and competed to be the father, especially since my godmother promised to support whoever succeeded. I started working at the campus bookstore to save escape money. My coworker Caleb noticed the locket always glowing and asked about it. When I broke down and told him everything, he was horrified. He helped me research legal options and even drove me to consultations with lawyers who all said that until I turned 21, she controlled everything. Caleb became my only safe person, letting me hide at his apartment when the church boys got too aggressive. I trusted him completely. My godmother escalated when months passed without pregnancy. She started scheduling fertility appointments with a doctor from her church who gave me vitamins that made me dizzy. One particularly bad night after the church boys had been especially pushy, I went to Caleb's apartment just to feel safe. He made me tea and let me cry about the whole situation. I woke up on his couch the next morning with a splitting headache and my jeans unbuttoned, but Caleb said I'd just passed out from stress. He was so gentle, helping me get home and making sure I was okay. I trusted him. After that night, I started fighting back harder against my godmother. I told the seminary boys I had an STD to scare them off. I loudly announced my period at church to embarrass her. She retaliated by hiring 2 more boys, saying competition would motivate everyone. Through it all, Caleb was my rock. I'd go to his place whenever things got bad, and he'd make me that same soothing tea. Sometimes I'd wake up confused, clothes disheveled, but he always had explanations about stress and exhaustion. Caleb helped me plan my escape. We'd leave right after my shift ended, drive to his sister's place 3 states away where I could hide until I turned 21. I'd been slowly packing, telling my godmother the extra bags were for donations. He'd already called his sister and set up a job for me at her restaurant. Freedom was close when Caleb texted, asking me to meet him at his apartment to go over final details. When I arrived, my godmother was sitting on his couch holding bank statements. $8,000, she said, waving the papers. That's what your friend owes in student loans. Guess what I offered to pay? Caleb wouldn't look at me. She explained how she'd hired him months ago to work at the bookstore and befriend me. Every escape plan, every lawyer visit, he'd reported back. Every time I'd hidden at his apartment, she'd known exactly where I was. Show her the tests, my godmother said. Caleb pulled papers from a drawer with shaking hands. Medical papers. Pregnancy tests from the last 3 weeks, all positive. You never remembered the nights properly, he said quietly. The tea helped with that. I kept hoping one would take so this could be over. My legs gave out as I realized all those mornings waking up confused on his couch weren't from stress. I tried to run, but he blocked the door. It's already done, he said. You're already pregnant. Just let her help you now. My godmother sat there smiling, saying this was God's plan all along. She pulled out adoption papers already drawn up, her name listed as the baby's guardian. You can go to college after you deliver, she said. Everyone wins. I grabbed a lamp and smashed it against his head. While he stumbled, I ran to the hallway screaming for help. Other apartments opened and people came out as Caleb chased me, shouting, "She's having another episode! I'm trying to help!" But I kept screaming the truth about the pregnancy tests and the tea until someone called 911. When police arrived, my godmother tried her usual story about my mental health. But Caleb panicked when he saw the cops. Blood was running down his face and he blurted out, "She wasn't supposed to find out yet. You said we'd tell her after she was too far along to do anything." The police searched his apartment and found the pregnancy tests, the drugged tea, and videos on his computer. They arrested them both while I stood there trying to process that I was pregnant by someone I'd trusted completely. As the police car pulled away, my godmother smiled through the window and mouthed, "See you in 9 months." I looked down at my stomach, knowing she was right. There was no escaping her now. My feet wouldn't move from the spot where I'd watched the police car disappear, while more sirens got louder, and 3 more patrol cars pulled up with lights flashing everywhere. The hallway filled with uniforms and radios crackling, and neighbors coming out of every door to stare at me standing there with lamp pieces still scattered around my feet. An officer kept asking if I needed medical attention, but my mouth wouldn't work right and my whole body shook so hard my teeth chattered. The female officer put a blanket around my shoulders and guided me to sit on the stairs, while they took pictures of everything and more neighbors whispered behind their hands. 2 paramedics came through the crowd with a stretcher and medical bags, and the woman paramedic knelt down to check my pulse while explaining they needed to take me to the hospital for examination. They helped me stand and walk to the ambulance where they strapped monitors to my arm and asked questions I could barely answer about what happened. The ride took forever with the paramedic writing notes about my vital signs and telling me everything would be documented properly. At the emergency room entrance, a nurse with a badge that said Phoebe Conrad met us and explained she was a sane nurse who would do the forensic exam and test for any drugs in my system. She took me to a private room away from the main emergency area and gave me a hospital gown while explaining each step of what would happen. The exam took hours with photographs and swabs and blood draws, while Phoebe documented every detail and sealed evidence bags with special tape. She was gentle but thorough, and kept telling me I was being brave even when I cried during the internal exam. After everything was done, she brought me water and crackers and sat with me while we waited for the detective. Monica Thornton arrived wearing a suit and carrying a recorder and notepad, and asked if I felt okay to talk. I pulled the golden locket over my head with shaking hands and gave it to her while explaining about the tracking chip and how it monitored everywhere I went. She took photos of it from every angle before putting it in an evidence bag, and asking about those nights at Caleb's apartment. I told her about waking up confused with my clothes messed up and how he always said it was just stress, but now I knew what really happened. She wrote everything down and kept saying none of this was my fault, and that I'd done nothing wrong by trusting someone who seemed safe. The questions went on for another hour about the tea and the vitamins, and every detail I could remember about those foggy mornings. Around 4 a.m, a woman named Lila Swanson from Victim Services knocked and came in with a bag of supplies and paperwork. She showed me an emergency phone with a panic button that would call 911 instantly if I pressed it 3 times fast. The motel voucher was for a place 20 minutes from campus where they had special agreements for situations like mine. Lila helped me make a safety plan about not going anywhere alone and varying my routes and checking in with her every day. She drove me to the motel in her own car and walked me to the room to make sure the locks worked and showed me the back exit route. The room smelled like old carpet and cleaning products, but it had a deadbolt and a chain and a chair I could prop under the doorknob. After Lila left, I checked the locks 5 times and looked out the peephole whenever I heard footsteps in the hallway. Every car door slamming made me jump, and I kept the lights on even though my eyes burned from exhaustion. Sleep came in 10-minute bursts where I dreamed about waking up on Caleb's couch and feeling his hands on me before jerking awake covered in sweat. I'd check the locks again and sit in the chair watching the door until my eyes closed and the nightmare started over. When morning came, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the man said he was Jason Barnes from the district attorney's office. He explained the charges they were filing and how the case would move through the system over the next several months. He said they'd consider my input about plea deals or trial, but ultimately the state would make the decisions about prosecution. The legal terms made my head spin, but he promised to explain everything again in person when I felt ready to meet. An hour later, another call came from someone named Tristan McKee at the college's Title IX office about Caleb working at the bookstore. He needed to document everything for their investigation and talked about accommodations and safety measures on campus. The thought of going back to the school made my stomach turn, but I needed to know what protections they could offer. There's something about Caleb's whole setup that makes me really curious. The tea, the timing, the way he had those pregnancy tests ready to show but kept them hidden in a drawer. I wonder what his real plan was here, because 8,000. He scheduled a meeting for later in the week and said Caleb was already banned from campus pending the investigation. 3 days later, I finally went to the women's health clinic Lila had recommended where they did an ultrasound and blood work. The doctor moved the wand over my stomach and turned the screen to show a tiny blob that she said was about 6 weeks along. She printed out pictures I didn't want and explained all my options without pushing any agenda or judgment. The reality of being pregnant by someone who drugged me hit like a punch to the gut, and I sobbed in that exam room until I couldn't breathe. The nurse brought tissues and water and sat with me until the crying stopped and I could stand up again. By the end of that first week, the judge had reviewed all the evidence and granted a temporary protective order against both my godmother and Caleb. Lila explained it was just paper that wouldn't physically stop them, but it meant they'd be arrested if they came near me. The order covered 500 feet from me and specifically included my dorm and any campus buildings. That same day, my godmother posted her $50,000 bail with conditions including no contact with me directly or through third parties. Within 2 hours, my phone started buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize saying I was a liar who was destroying a good Christian woman. The messages kept coming with quotes from the Bible about false witnesses and threats about what happened to girls who made up stories. Each one made my hands shake worse until I turned the phone off completely and sat in that motel room wondering if the locks were enough. The next morning, my phone had 37 new messages from numbers I didn't know. Each one called me worse names than the last. Screenshots of Facebook posts from my godmother's church friends were spreading online with my face circled in red. They called me a liar and a whore and said I was destroying a good woman. My hands shook as I took screenshots of everything and forwarded them to Detective Monica Thornton's email. She replied within an hour saying she'd add them all to the evidence file. 2 days later, Lila picked me up for my first therapy appointment with someone named Ruth Palmer. The office was small with soft chairs and tissues on every table. Ruth had gray hair and kind eyes that didn't judge when I tried to tell her what happened. I couldn't get through the story without my mind going blank and floating away from my body. She stopped me and taught me this thing where I had to name 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear. It helped bring me back to the room when everything felt too much. She didn't push me to share more than I could handle that first time. The housing coordinator at the school found me a single room in the emergency dorms 3 days after that. It had new locks and a back entrance that most students didn't use. I spent an hour planning routes to my classes that avoided the bookstore completely. The room was tiny, but it was mine, and nobody else had the key. Detective Thornton called the next afternoon while I was unpacking my few things. Her voice was careful when she told me they'd recovered videos from Caleb's computer during the search. She said I didn't need to watch them and honestly recommended I didn't. Just knowing they existed made me run to the bathroom and throw up, but it also meant proof that I wasn't making this up. The next week, Jason Barnes from the district attorney's office filed the formal charges: sexual assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and administering drugs without consent. He told me the church doctor was also under investigation for giving out controlled substances illegally. The charges were real now, not just an arrest. My godmother had already frozen every account with my name on it by then. I couldn't get money for food or even toothpaste. Lila helped me fill out forms for emergency victim compensation funds and drove me to a food pantry near campus. The church people kept it simple with boxes of pasta and canned soup, but it was enough to eat. I started writing down everything in a notebook Lila gave me. Every weird car that parked too long outside my dorm. Every message from a number I didn't know. Every time someone stared too long in the dining hall. The dates and times and details filled 3 notebooks in 2 weeks. Writing it down made me feel like I had some control over something. The bail review hearing happened 3 weeks after the arrest. Jason Barnes stood up and showed the judge printouts of all the harassment from church members. He explained how my godmother was using other people to contact me even though she wasn't supposed to. The judge looked angry reading through the messages. She ordered GPS monitoring on my godmother's ankle and said she couldn't come within 500 feet of campus. If she did, she'd go straight back to jail. 2 days after that, Detective Thornton brought me a copy of my toxicology report from the hospital exam. The paper showed high levels of benzodiazepines in my blood, the same drugs in those vitamins from the church doctor. Reading it in black and white on official hospital paperwork helped quiet the voice in my head that kept wondering if maybe I'd imagined everything. The drugs were real, and the proof was right there. Tristan McKee from the Title IX office called that same week about my complaint against Caleb. He took it seriously right away and said Caleb was banned from campus while they investigated. He also said I didn't have to go back to the bookstore and they'd transfer me to a different campus job when I felt ready. The relief of knowing Caleb couldn't just show up at the school made me cry for 20 minutes after the call. But the church people kept finding ways to get to me. Someone left baby clothes on my dorm room door with a note about keeping God's blessing. I found my car tires flat one morning with a Bible verse written on the windshield. The food pantry volunteer told me someone had called asking if I'd been there. Each thing by itself seemed small, but together they made me scared to leave my room. I stopped going to the dining hall and lived on peanut butter sandwiches. My grades started slipping because I couldn't focus in class. Ruth taught me more grounding exercises, but some days nothing helped. The protective order felt like paper that couldn't actually protect me from anything. Lila kept checking on me and bringing groceries when I was too scared to leave. She never made me feel weak for being afraid. Detective Thornton called with updates about the case moving through the system. Jason Barnes explained about grand juries and indictments and preliminary hearings. The legal words blurred together, but I understood it would take months before any trial. Months of living like this, looking over my shoulder and jumping at every sound. My 20th birthday passed without me telling anyone because the last birthday had started all of this. The housing coordinator found me a job at the library doing data entry since I couldn't go back to the bookstore. My first day seemed okay until break time when someone made tea in the staff room. The smell hit me, and suddenly I was back on Caleb's couch with that same bitter taste in my mouth. My hands started shaking so bad I dropped my mug and it shattered on the floor. Everyone stared while I stood there frozen and gasping for air. My supervisor helped me outside and said to take all the time I needed for medical leave while I worked things out with Ruth. 2 days later, Monica called saying one of Caleb's neighbors wanted to give a statement. The woman lived across the hall and heard everything that night. She told Monica she saw Caleb chase me down the hallway while I screamed about pregnancy tests and drugged tea. She said Caleb grabbed my arm trying to pull me back to his apartment before other doors started opening. Having someone else confirm what happened made me cry with relief because part of me still wondered if I'd made it all up. Monica also had news about those vitamins from the church doctor. The lab found benzodiazepines in them, the same stuff that showed up in my blood work at the hospital. She'd tracked down the order forms showing the doctor specifically requested them with my name on the prescription 3 months before my birthday. The paper trail went back even further than I thought. Jason called me to his office and spread out papers across his desk. They were adoption documents my godmother had drawn up 7 months ago, way before she gave me that locket. Her name was already filled in as the adoptive parent, and she'd even picked out names for the baby. The dates proved she'd been planning this whole thing since before I turned 19. He said this evidence would help prove conspiracy and premeditation at trial. Flynn Dominguez was the civil lawyer Lila recommended, and he agreed to take my case on contingency. He explained I could sue my godmother and Caleb for emotional distress, battery, and conspiracy. The civil case would be separate from the criminal charges, and could help me get damages for therapy costs and lost wages. Having 2 different legal paths meant more chances to hold them accountable, even if one case hit problems. That night, I sat at my laptop researching abortion options in my state. The websites explained medical versus surgical procedures, how the pills worked versus the in-clinic process. I learned I had until 12 weeks for the pill option, and up to 24 weeks for surgical. The information felt huge and scary, but I made appointments at 2 different clinics just to talk through my options with actual doctors. 3 days later, I woke up to shouting outside my dorm window. Anti-abortion protesters were standing on the sidewalk with giant signs showing graphic images. They had my name on some of the signs and were yelling about murder and hell. How did Monica track down that paper trail with the doctor ordering those special vitamins 3 months before the birthday? The way all these pieces connect. The adoption papers from 7 months ago, the drug orders, the neighbor who heard everything. It's like watching a puzzle come together where every piece was planned way ahead. Campus police showed up and documented everything but said the protesters were on public property. I had to use the back entrance for a whole week while they stood out there every morning. Someone must have told them about my situation, but I never found out who. Then someone slipped a letter under my door while I was in the shower. My godmother's handwriting covered both sides of the paper saying God would forgive me if I kept the baby and gave it to her like we planned. She wrote that this was all part of his design, and I just needed faith to see it. I took pictures of every word, then called the police to file another report for violating the protective order. Lila came over and helped me get the locks changed again, even though we'd just done it 2 weeks before. The victim services tech person spent 3 hours with me setting up digital security. We changed my phone number and set up two-factor authentication on every account I had. She showed me how to lock down my social media so only approved people could see anything. We made new email addresses for medical stuff and legal stuff to keep them separate. Each new password and security question felt like adding another brick to a wall between me and them. The next morning, I had to take the bus to campus for a meeting with disability services. Everything seemed fine until someone sat down right next to me, even though the bus was mostly empty. Their leg pressed against mine, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My chest got tight and my vision went fuzzy around the edges. I remembered Ruth teaching me to count 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear. I focused on the bus floor and the window and the seat in front of me while counting my breaths. The person next to me moved to another seat and I managed to stay on the bus until my stop. When I got off, my legs were shaking, but I'd gotten through it without completely falling apart. Ruth said that was progress, even though it didn't feel like it. Jason Barnes called the next morning and asked me to come to his office that afternoon. I took 2 buses to get there because I still couldn't drive without my hands shaking. His office was on the 3rd floor of the courthouse and smelled like old coffee and paper. He had boxes stacked everywhere with labels I couldn't read from where I sat. For 3 hours, he went through everything that might happen if the case went to trial. He showed me pictures of the courtroom and where everyone would sit. He explained I could ask for breaks whenever I needed them. He said I could choose not to testify at all if I wanted. Nobody could force me to do anything. He wrote down all my rights on a yellow legal pad and made me a copy to keep. Knowing I had choices made my chest feel less tight for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, Detective Thornton called while I was trying to eat breakfast. She told me Caleb was thinking about taking a plea deal to avoid trial. She asked if I wanted to write something for the judge to read about how this affected me. The thought of putting everything into words made my stomach hurt. But I said yes anyway. I spent the whole next week working on it. I'd write a sentence, then delete it. Write a paragraph, then start over. I tried to explain how. They took away my ability to trust anyone. How I couldn't sleep without checking the locks 5 times. How tea made me throw up now. How I had to plan escape routes everywhere I went. I wrote about waking up confused on his couch not knowing what happened. I wrote about the pregnancy tests he kept in his drawer. I wrote about my godmother's smile through the police car window. The final version was 2 pages long and my hands shook the whole time I typed it. I didn't write about certain things because those were mine to keep private. Ruth helped me practice reading it out loud in case I needed to. Meanwhile, I'd been researching clinics in other counties where nobody would recognize me. I used a fake name when I called to ask questions. The woman on the phone was patient and explained everything twice when I asked. Adriana from my support group heard me mention needing a ride somewhere far. She offered to drive me wherever I needed to go and promised not to ask questions. I trusted her because she'd been through something similar and understood. The clinic was 90 minutes away in a strip mall next to a pizza place. I signed in with the fake name I'd used on the phone. When they called me back, the nurse asked about the pregnancy circumstances. I told her everything without making excuses or apologizing. She held my hand while I cried and said surviving made me brave. She said lots of people don't make it this far. The doctor came in and explained all my options again even, though I'd already researched everything. She showed me pamphlets and diagrams and answered every question I had. At the end, I asked for 1 more week to make my final decision. She said that was completely fine and held my appointment slot. The pressure in my chest felt huge, but I needed to make this choice for myself. Not because of deadlines or other people's opinions. 3 days later, I woke up to 50 text messages from people I barely knew. Someone sent me a link to a local blog with my full name and photo from my student ID. The headline said I was the victim in the campus pregnancy scandal. They'd gotten details wrong, but enough was right that everyone would know. My phone kept buzzing with more messages and calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I called Lila crying and she came to get me within an hour. She drove me to a building I'd never seen before on the other side of town. She said it was emergency housing so secret that even campus security didn't know the exact address. Only 3 people had the location, and visitors needed special approval. She helped me carry my stuff inside and showed me how the new security system worked. The protective order hearing was scheduled for that Friday morning. I wore the only nice outfit I had left and sat in the courtroom trying not to shake. When the judge asked me to speak, I stood up and talked for maybe 2 minutes. I told him about checking locks constantly and planning escape routes and throwing up when I smelled tea. I told him about the church people following me and sending messages. The judge listened without interrupting, then extended the protective order for 2 full years. My shoulders dropped and I could breathe normally for the first time in weeks. The next Tuesday, a church member I'd never seen before knocked on my emergency housing door. She handed me a box wrapped in pink paper before I could say anything. Inside were tiny baby clothes and a leather Bible with my name printed on it. A note in my godmother's handwriting said, "God would forgive everything if I made the right choice." I took pictures of everything, then called the police immediately. Jason Barnes filed contempt charges that same day and said my godmother would face additional consequences. Flynn had been working on our civil case for weeks, gathering evidence and documents. He filed the lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and conspiracy and invasion of privacy. He explained that taking legal action instead of just defending myself would help me feel more in control. He was right, because doing something active instead of just reacting felt like taking back a tiny piece of power. 2 weeks later, the Title IX office sent me a letter saying their investigation was done. The bookstore manager called me that same afternoon to tell me Caleb was banned from campus forever. She said they had to do special training now because of what happened. I sat in my emergency housing room reading the letter over and over. It said he couldn't come within 500 feet of any campus building. The security office got his photo to watch for him. I could finally walk to class without checking over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Detective Thornton called me the next morning asking if I could come to the station. She had boxes of evidence spread across a conference table when I got there. She explained how each piece would be used at trial. The pregnancy tests were in plastic bags with labels. The videos from Caleb's computer were on a hard drive she kept locked in a special cabinet. She asked if I wanted to watch them to prepare for court. I told her no immediately. My hands were shaking just seeing the evidence bags. She said that was completely fine and I didn't have to look at anything I didn't want to. Setting that boundary felt like I was taking back control of something. 3 days later, I went back to the clinic for my appointment. The doctor was a woman with gray hair who spoke softly. She explained every single step before she did anything. First, she did an ultrasound to confirm how far along I was. 7 weeks. She showed me the medication and explained how it worked. The first pill would stop the pregnancy from growing. I'd take the second pills tomorrow at home. She gave me a paper with clear instructions about what would happen. She wrote down a 24-hour number I could call if I needed anything. The nurse held my hand while I took the first pill with water. They had me sit in a quiet room for 30 minutes to make sure I was okay. I felt scared but also sure about my choice. The next morning, Adriana came to my emergency housing room at 8. She brought pads and heating pads and bottles of water. I took the second medication at 9 with her sitting next to me. Within an hour, the cramps started. They got worse fast. I was curled up on my bed crying from the pain. Adriana rubbed my back and brought me water every hour. She helped me to the bathroom when I needed it. The physical pain was bad, but knowing I was taking control of my own body made it bearable. By evening, the worst was over. I slept for 12 hours straight. 3 days later, I went back to the clinic for my follow-up. The doctor did another ultrasound and confirmed everything was complete. Why does her godmother keep finding ways around the protective order? First protesters who somehow know everything, then letters appearing under doors, now church members with baby clothes. The timing feels too coordinated to be random people acting alone. She gave me papers about ongoing care and birth control options. She said I should rest for a few more days and drink lots of water. I went back to my room and slept for another whole day. My body felt empty, but also like it was mine again. That Friday, Jason called with news about my godmother. The judge had revoked her bail because of the care package violation. She was being held in county jail until the trial. He said she'd tried to argue it. Wasn't really contact since she didn't deliver it herself. The judge didn't buy it. Knowing she was locked up changed everything. I slept through the whole night for the first time since the arrest. I didn't wake up checking the locks or jumping at noises. The next week, Detective Thornton called with more news. The medical board had suspended the church doctor's license. They were investigating him for illegally prescribing controlled substances. She said he might lose his license permanently. Each person who hurt me facing consequences felt like a small piece of justice. I spent the weekend organizing all my evidence into a binder. I made tabs for different sections like medical records and police reports and text messages. I created a timeline showing everything that happened with dates and details. Flynn came by to look at it and said I'd done better work than most law students. Jason said the same thing when I showed him my witness contact list. Having everything organized made me feel more prepared for whatever came next. The Disability Services office called me in for a meeting about my classes. I'd been missing a lot because of court dates and panic attacks. The counselor said I could switch to part-time enrollment. She helped me fill out forms for extensions on my big assignments. I felt weird about needing accommodations, but she said surviving trauma takes energy that would normally go to the school. Accepting help wasn't weakness. It was being smart about healing. Flynn had been working on something big with the inheritance issue. He filed papers asking the court to appoint someone neutral to manage my money until I turned 21. He suggested a lawyer named Beckett Irwin, who specialized in trust management. The hearing was quick. My godmother's lawyer tried to argue she should keep control, but the judge looked at all the evidence of her using money to control me. He appointed Beckett as trustee that same day. My godmother couldn't touch my inheritance anymore. Flynn said Beckett would make sure I had money for school and living expenses. The last piece of her financial control was gone. The disability office helped me find a data entry job in the basement of the admin building, where nobody ever came except to drop off boxes of forms. I spent 8 hours a day typing numbers into spreadsheets with my headphones on, not having to smile at customers or make small talk with coworkers. The supervisor left me alone after showing me the system on my first day. I'd arrive early to avoid the crowds, take my lunch in an empty conference room, and leave through the back door. Every completed spreadsheet felt like proof I could still function. The routine helped my brain settle into something that wasn't constant panic. 2 weeks into the job, Jason called to say Caleb's plea hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend practicing my impact statement in front of the bathroom mirror until I could say the words without my voice shaking. Monday morning, I put on the same outfit I'd worn to every court appearance, a gray sweater and black pants that made me feel invisible. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Caleb sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with his lawyer whispering in his ear. When the judge asked him how he pleaded, he said guilty to 3 counts of sexual assault in a voice so quiet the judge made him repeat it. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium and unfolded my statement with steady hands. I talked about the tea and waking up confused and how I'd trusted him when I had nobody else. I said he stole my ability to feel safe in my own body. He kept his head down the whole time, but I didn't need him to look at me. This wasn't about him anymore. The judge took a 15-minute recess before sentencing. When she came back, she gave him 3 years in state prison with 10 years of supervised probation after release. He'd have to register as a sex offender for life. His lawyer had asked for probation only, saying Caleb had no prior record and showed remorse. The judge said the planning and repeated nature of the assaults warranted prison time. 3 years didn't feel like enough for what he did, but Jason said most survivors don't even get that much. As the bailiff led Caleb away in handcuffs, I felt something loosen in my chest. That same week, the permanent protective order hearing happened in a different courtroom. My godmother appeared on a video screen from jail wearing the same orange jumpsuit Caleb had worn. Her lawyer argued the temporary order was sufficient, but the judge reviewed the evidence of the care package and the harassment from church members. She granted a 5-year protective order with strict provisions against any third-party contact. My godmother couldn't communicate with me through anyone else, and anybody who helped her would face criminal charges. Having protection that would last beyond the criminal case made me sleep better. Flynn had been busy with the civil case while the criminal proceedings moved forward. The court date for appointing Beckett as permanent trustee came up faster than expected. My godmother's lawyer showed up trying to argue she should maintain some oversight of the funds since she'd managed them for years. The judge cut him off and said my godmother had forfeited any claim through her criminal actions. Beckett would have full control of my inheritance and college fund until I turned 21. Flynn had already worked out a monthly allowance for living expenses and tuition payments that would go directly to the school. I'd finally have access to my own money without anybody using it to control me. The church released a public statement the next day, distancing themselves from my godmother's actions. They said she'd acted alone and violated their values. Some members still sent nasty messages on social media calling me a liar and saying I destroyed a good woman. I spent an afternoon blocking every single one and reporting the worst threats to Detective Thornton. A few people from the congregation reached out with real apologies, saying they'd had no idea what was happening. One woman said she'd always felt something was off about the fertility talks, but hadn't known how to speak up. I saved those messages in a folder labeled Good People to read when the bad ones got too loud. The Title IX office finished their investigation and sent me the final report. They were implementing permanent changes to campus employment screening, including background checks for anyone working with students. There would be mandatory training about consent and coercion for all staff. My case had exposed gaps in their system that let Caleb get hired without proper vetting. The report said these changes would help protect future students. It didn't undo what happened to me, but knowing it might prevent someone else from going through this helped. Adriana had been texting me for weeks about coming back to the support group. I finally went on a Thursday evening when the data entry felt especially heavy. The room was the same, with the circle of chairs and the box of tissues on the table. 3 new people had joined since I'd last been there. We went around sharing wins and struggles. One woman talked about testifying at her ex's trial. Another celebrated 6 months of therapy. When my turn came, I told them about the guilty plea and the protective order and getting control of my money. They understood why these felt like victories without me having to explain. We ended the meeting with breathing exercises and reminders to be gentle with ourselves. Walking back to my dorm, I took the long way that went past the bookstore. My chest got tight when I saw the familiar windows, but I kept walking and used Ruth's technique of naming 5 things I could see, 4 I could hear, 3 I could touch. By the time I reached the other side, my breathing was normal again. Each time I faced something that scared me and survived, I took back a little more space in my own life. Flynn called that night with news from the civil discovery process. He'd found emails between my godmother and the church doctor from 3 years ago discussing fertility medications and optimal timing. She'd researched everything from ovulation tracking to fertility drugs, creating detailed plans for when I'd turn 19. The emails showed she'd specifically chosen Caleb from a list of students with financial problems who worked at campus businesses. This wasn't some sudden decision or misguided attempt to help me. She'd planned every detail for years, treating my body like her property before I even knew I was in danger. Flynn sent me copies of everything to keep in my files while Jason Barnes called about the next hearing date for my godmother's case. I told him I wouldn't be coming this time. The courtroom made my chest tight and my hands shake, and Ruth had been working with me on setting boundaries about what I could handle. Jason understood and promised to call me right after with updates. 2 days later, I got a thick envelope from the Victim Compensation Fund with approval letters for my therapy costs and housing assistance for the next year. The relief hit me so hard I sat on my dorm floor crying while reading the paperwork 3 times to make sure it was real. Flynn had helped me apply months ago, but I'd been scared to hope it would actually come through. That same week, Detective Thornton called about returning the golden locket for evidence processing. The way she turned spreadsheet work into healing makes so much sense. Repetitive tasks can calm an anxious mind. I wonder if that basement office became her safe space where numbers replaced the chaos of everything else happening above ground. I met her at the station and pulled it from the small box where I'd kept it since that night. The weight of it in my palm made me remember all those months of feeling its chain around my neck, knowing she was tracking me. I handed it to Detective Thornton and watched her seal it in an evidence bag. My neck felt lighter even though I hadn't worn it in months. Finals week came and I managed to finish 2 of my classes with passing grades while taking a withdrawal in the 3rd. The registrar's office processed the paperwork without asking questions since they had my disability accommodations on file. My transcript would show the struggle, but I was still enrolled and still moving forward. I packed up my emergency dorm room over 3 trips, loading boxes into the car Adriana borrowed from her cousin. We'd found a small 2-bedroom apartment near campus that accepted the housing voucher. The other bedroom belonged to Maya from our support group, who understood why I needed to check the locks twice before bed and why sudden noises made me jump. We spent the first weekend setting up the space with soft lamps instead of overhead lights and hanging plants in every window. Maya had panic attacks too, so we made a plan for helping each other through bad nights. Ruth's office felt safer now after months of sessions. She asked me to try saying something we'd been working toward for weeks. "My body belongs to me," I said, and for the first time the words didn't feel like a lie. We sat with that for a full minute, me repeating it quietly while she nodded. The truth of it settled into my chest warm and solid. I could feel the difference from even a month ago when saying those words made me cry. That night, I opened my laptop and started typing a post about the worst gift I'd ever received. The words came steady now, not rushed or desperate like when I'd tried to write about it before. I didn't need anyone to believe me or validate what happened. I just wanted to tell my story in my own voice. I saved the draft to review later, knowing I'd post it when I felt ready. Friday evening came and I grabbed my keys to meet the support group for dinner at the Thai place downtown. The protective order paperwork stayed in my bag like always, but I noticed its weight less now. We'd started this tradition of going out after meetings, just 5 or 6 of us who'd gotten close over the months. Walking down the sidewalk, someone made a joke about their therapist's terrible coffee, and we all laughed, real laughs that came from our stomachs. I realized I was actually happy in that moment, not just getting through it or surviving, but actually feeling good. The fear was still there somewhere, but it didn't control every minute anymore. I was starting to live again, making plans for next semester and thinking about switching my major to something I actually wanted instead of what my godmother had picked. The bruises were gone, and the nightmares came less often. I was learning to trust my own choices and my own voice. The story wasn't over, but I was writing it myself now. Thanks for letting me wander along with you through all this. It's definitely been quite a journey to share together. Until next time. Like the video, it helps more than you think.